Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Resilient Purpose Podcast. Today we are going to show you an episode about the healing of sport and the importance of taking a healing and development perspective to coaching and leadership in sport. And so we are joined by two wonderful guests, Steve Graner, who is one of the leaders in the development of the neurosequential model in sport from the work of Dr. Bruce Perry, and then Megan Bartlett, who is the founder of the Center for Healing and Justice in Sport. And so we have a great conversation just about coaching in general, from as early on in youth sports all the way up to the professional level, and looking at a variety of things related to healing of sport, but also how we can sometimes misfire in our use of sport in terms of the development of our young. And so I think it's a really great episode. I think anybody who has an interest in sport or has an interest in coaching and leadership in sport should tune into this episode. I think you'll really enjoy it. So take a look, let us know what you think, and take care. Hi, Megan. I'm Doug Pfeifer.
Hey, Doug.
Thank you for joining quickly and
or
being so available. So this is I really, I entered the mental health field and I work in a mental health agency. And so everything's about working with mental health, but I've always been into sports and played sports growing up and coached my kids and youth soccer and all sorts of things. So the intersection of mental health in sports, but also NMT in sports has been really kind of fun for me, and just kind of seeing what you guys are doing. And I've brought some of those concepts to different sports teams, but I feel like this is an important topic because everybody's overwhelmed, but I think, the people that are probably less prepared for the idea of trauma and stress and all sorts of things in mental health, it would be coaches. We focus so much on the X's and O's and the mechanics and the techniques and stuff like that. The last thing we're focused on is the actual idea of mental health, or just even how our brain responds. I'm curious, and I don't mind if you guys don't mind us getting started, but how you guys how did you make that connection, or how did you guys what's the origin story, I guess, is basically what I'm trying to say, because I love origin stories. But how did it kind of go from being a coach and doing those types of things? I'm sure it started with being an athlete, but then, hey, I really need to kind of bring this piece into it as well.
Yeah, I think Steve and I both have origin stories for the way we see the connection between sport and the concepts. Mm-hmm. And then the origin story of how that became NM Sport is that I reached out to Dr. Perry on Twitter. So.
I couldn't wait. I knew I was not going to talk. I knew she could tell the story.
But I think that's less the origin story that you're looking for. I think we both, Steve is a longtime coach and educator and athlete, and I was a longtime coach and athlete. And so I think we both have origin stories there that I think are probably more what you're looking for.
Well,
not the magic of
Twitter. Was there did you know about this going into it, or did you know it from your own personal experience as an athlete that kind of said, this is something that I never got as a coach or as a player, that I'm going to go right from the start? Or was there when you started coaching and being like, man, I'm being faced with these issues that
to be honest, I didn't know any of this as a coach, or when I was doing my most serious coaching, I didn't know about this. Mm-hmm. I was in a course as a young professional, taught by some mental health professionals about sort of behavior management, mental health, and the out of school time world, which the out of school time world obviously needs a lot of this information, and certainly did probably close to 15 years ago now. Yeah. And they said, read this book. And it was The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And so when I did, I could see the connection between what adults working with young people, particularly young people in sort of under-resourced communities, historically exploited communities, didn't know about the young people they were working with. And so at the time I was overseeing a core of about 50 coaches in Boston for an out of school time after school program. So it immediately made sense to me that they needed to understand some of these concepts in order to understand the young people they were working with. I would get a lot of, we need behavior management strategies. We need behavior management strategies. We need behavior management strategies. And I sort of thought to myself, no, actually what you need is to understand behavior. And
Right. Yeah.
that was not something that they did. And I could see in that book sort of the ways in which sport, if it's done right, delivers on a lot of the sort of healing that Bruce outlines in the book. So for me, it was reading that book and applying it to my direct personal experience in that moment. And then 10 years later, I started stalking Bruce on Twitter and asked him to do it more formally. I was sort of sharing his work, sharing his work informally. But I said there should be an NM sport.
Right.
He said yes, and I never thought he'd say yes, but he gets the sport thing.
I could have told you he
immediately.
Would say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was instrumental probably in his frame of work. I'm sure when he was learning neuroscience and trauma and stuff like that, that his own experience as an athlete probably, I'm sure he talks about that. What about you, Steve, about in terms of, was it, because you were on an episode earlier about the education piece. Was it about the same time? Did you catch it earlier? What was kind of that connection of how it could be really relevant in the sport world in terms of understanding those things? Yeah,
great question, because I was lucky enough, like Megan, for most of my coaching, I didn't know any of this. And I did some good things. I understood relationships. I understood, keeping kids safe, basically. But I made mistakes too. There's some things I didn't do well, and certain kids I didn't serve well. I'm going to give an example sometime in this call But anyway, I had maybe 2 or 3 years of coaching. One while I was starting this training, I was coaching, and then I coached for 2 more springs and falls after that. So I did get an opportunity. So I just thought, here, let's anchor this to a story, because I'm in my last year of coaching track, and we have a kid who is out for track. He's as clunky, or he actually looks like an athlete, but he can't run. He's so arrhythmic, he's clunky, he can't run a 490 seconds, and he's on a high school track team. And of all those things, then he wants to pole vault, the most complicated event on the track. Probably, I don't know why he wanted to do that, but anyway, right. I was just watching him, and he would miss practice, and we would have discussions, we gotta, this kid is breaking the rules, we gotta drop him from the team, blah blah blah. From my new perspective, I said, no. We can't. I said to my head coach, who was not arguing with me, I said, we got to keep this kid, because I can even tell by the way he runs, he's been through something. And sure enough, I took him aside in the weight room, and I just started asking him about his life a little bit, very innocently. I did. Right. And sure enough, he was a kid, a victim of all kinds of trauma, and had been through a lot. And I just said to our coach, we just got to take him every day we can get him, so he gets rhythmic, repetitive movement. That's it. And that was enough to a game changer for that kid. I don't think he ever participated in a track meet, but he ran faster than 90 seconds in the 400. And we didn't let him pole vault, thankfully. But there's just an example of perspective. Yeah. 5 years earlier, I would have said, kick him off the team. We got to be consistent. He's not showing up. We don't want him. We don't need him. He's not going to do our team any good. I could have gone through a litany of excuses and reasons to dump him. And I had one really good perspective that said, we got to keep him. And it was all the difference in the world. Your curiosity, you something about you were just curious about what was going on, something you needed to kind of look at further. So sports is, I think, I never kind of, when I played it,
it was a good experience for me. I enjoyed it. I don't think I was as self-reflective to kind of recognize its impact on me, or in any way, or how it fit into other aspects of my life. But sometimes maybe sports is kind of seen as, maybe it's not seen in the side of healing. It's seen as there's a strong conflict, or an internal conflict sometimes I see between the competitive nature and the development nature of kids. Like there's, like when I coach my kids in kindergarten through second grade in soccer, it's not as competitive, although you do get some parents and some coaches that are really competitive, but there is kind of a consensus about it being about development and learning the game and everything like that. But then as you get older, the idea of healing and development kind of seem to take a back seat instead of competitiveness. So if the idea is that sport can be really healing, it almost kind of misses the competitiveness, sometimes gets in the way of that, or interferes with that, where you're more likely to say, get him off the team. He's not fully committed, or whatever. Maybe I just don't have the impetus to want to say, let me find out more. Like, the coach you were with. So I don't know if you guys can speak to that in terms of how do you see sport as healing, and maybe kind of what forces we have in sports that tend to interfere with that.
I think that's right on. I think, we've spent the last about dozen years trying to convince people that coaches need training in this, and people look at you like you have 10 heads.
Right.
It's not it is certainly a new language to coaches to talk about healing, for sure. And there are parts of sport that even when you are making the case, which I think is, from a neurobiological perspective and from a social or emotional perspective, is actually quite easy to make. Mm-hmm. But even when you're making that case, you have to be very careful to not gloss over the parts of sport that can do harm. And I think that is, to me, when I hear you saying that piece about how the development of kids gets separated from competition, that's the sort of social norms, and that's the sort of the way that we deliver sport, but it's not actually inherent to sport, I think, if we're doing sport the right way. And right. So to me, what I always talk about is the sort of core elements of sport as healing, again, if we're doing it responsibly and right, yeah. Are the potential for relationships, right? Adult yeah. and kid relationships and peer relationships, the opportunity to move your body, right? Steve's story is such a great one in that yeah. way, right? Just the regulating rhythmic experiences in sport. And then the doses of stress, right? The resilience building stress, the opportunity to have a little stress and come all the way back down, and a little bit more and come all the way back down, and all of those patterns of stress that are controlled and manageable and predictable, where so many young people's stress is chaotic, unpredictable, and severe. So I think the problem with competition is not actually competition. It's how we deliver competition and how we sort of use competition as an excuse to kick that kid off the team, or to be, and the way I look at it is that it makes it easy for a coach to say, I have my way of coaching, and if you can't meet me, you're the problem, not me. Instead of saying, I'm going to coach 25 kids the way they need to be coached individually and differently. That's because we have parents who are volunteering for 2 hours a week, right? They don't, right. So I think there are lots of structural things that get in the way of being able to deliver sport in the way that we deliver everything else we do for young people.
Yeah, and Megan, I just love, and I just want to make one quick comment, because I know Doug's ready. But competition itself can be healing.
Absolutely, right? The
fact,
dosing.
I think it's necessary, and when Megan talked about doses of stress, and the same way we would dose competition properly, I think competition is a necessary element, not our enemy. it's a form of stress we can control if we're willing.
Well, and I would say that it's helping kids learn how to face challenges, things that maybe are a little, they push you out of your comfort zone. You gotta, but I think when we do it wrong, we're focusing on the outcome of the competition and not the process of the competition. So we're not actually helping kids face that dose of stress in a therapeutic way.
Correct.
And I find that, one of my experience, because my kid has, done sports, basketball for the elementary school and volleyball. And I find that the kids that tend to not need all the attention because of how talented are and how much training they've had in previous teams still get most of the training and coaching, and the kids that are not as talented or as good don't get that much of attention. And so then they sit back, and then when they are facing that challenge, they freeze. They don't even know how to engage in the game. And so then they start thinking, well, I'm the worst player on the team and I suck and I don't know how to do that. And so we had a really great basketball team in elementary school. We had 2 players that were really good. Everybody else was kind of subpar. So we can manage most games. But when we faced a team that knew what they were doing, we would get handled like no problem. Because all you had to do was focus, but we put so much of that effort on the people that. And so here's my question around healing too, is do you find that kids that, I think I see like a lot of talented kids athletically are also very talented socially. You don't tend to see a lot of socially closed off, really good athletes. They tend to be very social and can affiliate very well, but there might be some kids that are really quiet and shy that maybe have talent, but don't get that opportunity to express that talent. I mean, is that something that you see? I don't know. It's kind of a thought of like the kids that are very cooperative and
well-regulated
tend to get that attention, but the kids that really don't know their place or struggle still could have the athletic talent, but because of that dysregulation, whether it's because they're shy or they tend to kind of get lost in that and they can't express that potential.
Well, yeah, I think that's definitely true. I think that, the kids who are good socially and academically and athletically are, it's connected to the privilege and, regulating the relational health they have in their life prior to that and during those experiences. And so I think the kids who need it the most often present as the hardest to work with, for either because they're shut off or they're disruptive or they're, in whatever way that shows up. So it's just easier for a coach to focus on the well-regulated kids. Mm-hmm. And again, that goes back to the system of, we have a parent who's volunteering, or we have a teacher who's doing it in the after school and they're being paid a little stipend to do it. And they already went through 8 hours of dysregulated kids. And, it's just, I think that comes back to in the way that we deliver sport, not the actual athletic talent. Because I think you're right. That's not dependent on how well regulated and supported they've been.
Mm-hmm. Just a quick comment, because I know this both as a teacher and as a coach, that those quiet kids were the ones that easily slipped through the cracks with me. I'm not going to blame anybody else but me.
Right.
And when I began to understand a little bit more about neurodevelopment and actually the way kids can kind of fade or dissociate or kind of, we lose them kind of mentally and connectively we lose them, I really started to pay more attention. I just started to understand who they are and where they're coming from. I think that was a fault of mine that turned into a little more of a strength once I understood a little bit more of the context of development and all the things we're talking about. But
we also put these expectations up around what, Steve's point about he's not coming consistently, so he doesn't belong here. We put, all these expectations around what coachable kids are. And they are not biologically respectful of kids who've been through a lot of adversity. They're not inclusive.
I wanted to read this. It was a social media post, and I wanted to get your take on this. I have my own opinions about it, but it was about related to coaching, and it was specifically about hard coaching. I don't know if you've ever heard that term being thrown around, but it said, love, when a coach, hard coaching equals love. When a coach takes it easy on you, they're setting you up for a hard life ahead. Don't take the coach for granted that's constantly holding you accountable. They might seem annoying to you in the moment until one day when you're annoyed with the life you have. Most coaches aren't out to get you, they're out to get you to where you want to be one day. There's a reason your coach is on you about being early, staying late, studying, doing extra, taking care of your body, and being a good person. It's because the coach loves you. They see what you could be one day, and if you can't see that hard coaching is love, you're blind. So there's a couple of these posts that I wanted to kind of bring up because they sometimes illustrate, and I think I want you guys to answer, and then I'll kind of bring my take on it.
Steve, what do you think?
Well, I'm laughing because I get this kind of same thing in education. And first of all, probably part of our training, and we all three share in this training, is a little bit is some of what they described as hard coaching sounded kind of like good coaching. Mm-hmm. And some of it didn't. I would say for the person, if you're speaking that message to a pretty resilient, put together kid, right, who maybe has a conflict with a coach, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. If you're giving that same message to someone who's got more adversity in their background, and then we're not taking into account sort of their state of being, as we often talk about watching their state of being or their state of living in the stress that sports, they're not going to understand that message. And that message works for some and it doesn't work for others. And I think for the kids we deal with in the trauma world, that's not a message they're going to understand.
Right.
They have to have a relationship first before that kind of more demanding coaching can happen in a positive way, I would say.
I think that the question, I think what often gets maybe sort of conflated in a way that's not helpful is the idea of hard coaching and accountability. Mm-hmm. That you have to be hard to hold kids accountable. And that, or that if you're not hard, you're not holding kids accountable, right? Or that to hold kids accountable means exactly what that post said. You come early, you do that. Like, right. I think, the question is not maybe that you're trying to help kids get to a place where they can function, where a world has expectations around those things. Right. The question is more about the journey to get there, right? Yeah. It's about building the skills in a young person to get there and knowing that not every kid, when they show up to you, has had all the practice doing those things, right? Here's the cutoff, you must meet these expectations takes no context into consideration. A young person who has to walk his little siblings home from school and then walk back to school for practice
is not going to get there early.
Not going to get there early, right? It's just the kids who have the resources and the support to be able to do that will. And that, I think, goes back to what we think of when we create the expectations. I think that if the expectation is that kids are invested in getting better for them, then it would look totally different. I think this goes back to the point you were making earlier, though, Doug, about how the systems are broken. We also expect 6-year-olds to play basketball like LeBron plays basketball, right? Like we don't,
we keep going earlier in development. We keep trying to make kids develop earlier than they need to.
And the professionalization of youth sports has pulled the kids who are regulated and show early signs of athletic talent or The worst thing that ever happened to youth sports was that everybody put the word elite after their club. Because it tells the parents what they want to hear, and it
gives them some unrealistic expectations about
exactly, and just perpetuates a cycle where the kids who are well regulated continue to get, like you said, paid attention to, and the services they need and the coaching that they need, that then keeps them moving up.
There's my take on that quote, and what stood out to me was, if you have to create this sign as a coach, you don't have a good relationship with your kids. Because if I have to create a sign that says you must listen to me, and if you don't, it's your fault, that is, you don't have a connection with your kids. You're just coaching, just the same in the teacher's world. I'm just teaching you academic content. If you don't learn it, that's on you. And that's kind of a way to protect, I guess, the coach or the teacher, to kind of distance yourself. The other thing I always kind of go back to is the kid receptive to what you're doing? So you constantly holding them accountable. I think where it's helpful to know the neurobiology is, like, I bet you half those times, maybe 3/4 of those times, that kid went into robotic compliance, where he's just kind of shaking you off and not really learning anything. And how is he attributing the criticism internally? Like, how is he processing it? Does he see that, oh man, I suck because that coach won't, see any good in me? Or, if you have to kind of justify being hard to get people to be receptive, you're really misunderstanding the human condition. So, and that was really because I agree with you, Steve, that there are pieces in there that I think are important, but it's that kind of the theme of it that kind of, I think, happens in a lot of situations. So there was another one I just wanted, it can't be overstated. When your coach is pushing and challenging you to get better, it means that they believe you got a lot more upside and can improve. Don't take constructive criticism as a personal attack. Take it as a compliment that your coach believes in you. And it's kind of that mentality of, like, you're just assuming that because what you're saying maybe you think is going to help them, that they are actually going to be receptive to it. And so is this kind of trauma-informed coaching making them more attuned coaches? Like, is that kind of a goal, is how do I become more attuned to all my players?
I think one thing that coaches are not, as a rule, is particularly reflective. So
why is that?
Well, because I don't think they've ever been held accountable. Okay. There is this norm in sport that, like, this is my coaching style, and if you don't fit my style, you have to go, which may be fine in the pros, right? Like, if you can't play for Bill Belichick, okay, go play for Pete Carroll. Like, right. But because that's true at that level, we've decided that for 8-year-olds, a coach can be like Bill Belichick, and just say, well, that's how I coach.
Yeah.
If they can't handle it, that's on them, it's not that I have to do something different, or that I have to, we coach sport skills to the individual. Mm-hmm. We won't coach these things to the individual. We'll say, in order for, Tim and Tom to learn how to do a left-handed layup, we will teach them differently based on what they need to do it. Right. But we won't, but if one of them can't listen long enough while I'm talking, we won't figure out a way to get them to stand closer, or to practice, or to do the thing. We just say, oh, well, get him out of here. He won't, he's choosing not to.
Right. He doesn't care enough. He doesn't
want it enough to listen to
me. Yeah. Come back when you're ready. Come back when you're ready to listen, kind of stuff.
Yeah. And we take that as a personal, like, they're, instead of saying, oh, I wonder what we can do to build that skill for a young person, we say, he just won't adapt to my style.
You brought up Bill Belichick and you brought up like Pete Carroll, and it made me think about developmental levels of coaching. So for example, I remember I listened to a lot of sports commentary like ESPN radio and all that, and they've talked about like coaches from the college trying to coach the pros in the same way that they coach the college.
Yep.
And because you're not going to talk to a grown adult the way you talk to that college kid whose life at that point depends on that scholarship. So when you bring that stuff into the pros, but it makes me think of like, there is a real importance to understanding development in that aspect of what kids need as a coach. But I would imagine that coaches in the pros are our role models, right? Like they're
who we see. Yeah.
So I grew up in the Bobby Knight era.
Right.
Throw your chair, choke your kid, like screaming and yelling is the way to get kids motivated, and that's...
Oh, we have Tom Izzo now.
Tom Izzo, right.
So
yeah.
It's not that, far removed.
Right. And so let me ask, how do you kind of talk to people about, or do you see kind of more overt examples of that, of people kind of trying to pattern themselves after the Nick Sabans, the ones, I think we also get a narrow picture of who they are really as coaches anyways. So we think because they're jerks in the press spot that must be how they treat their kids and things like that. And
we actually know they don't, right? We know that Tom Izzo drove what was the kid's name whose brother died in the middle of this season. We know Tom Izzo drove him to his brother's funeral, right? We know all of those stories about the athletes who have sort of made it from the Michigan State program. Always, they would, fall down in traffic for Tom Izzo. What we see the tough, we don't see the love, right? The thousands and thousands and thousands of moments that actually let Tom Izzo get away with screaming at a kid, right? Turning purple and screaming in a kid's face. We think it's the tough that's what's working, but it's actually the loves that's allowing them to get away with the tough, right? And I think we just don't see that. So I have this conversation with coaches every day. This idea that it is pervasive to think that you should coach the way that Nick Saban coaches, or that Bobby Knight or Tom Izzo or whomever coaches, because that's what we see. We're starting to see more Steve Kerrs, and we're starting to see more examples of Pete folks Carroll. Who don't need to do that. I don't know if you saw recently, there was a wonderful video of I'm totally blanking on his name, who plays for the Warriors, very outspoken guy.
Draymond Green.
Draymond Green. Yeah. Who said to Steve Kerr, he was putting his hand in his, and sort of had terrible body language about something that the Warriors were doing. And Draymond Green was like, get it together, coach. We're queuing off you and you're not delivering for us. And Steve said, he was right to call me out. I was wrong. This is not, and I think we're starting to have more examples like that, but historically it hasn't been the norm.
It's not, it's not highlighted and supported. I do want to, because you founded the Center for Healing and Justice Through Sport, Megan, and I think I was curious. I wasn't sure because you did We Coach as well. Is that still a separate entity, or did it change into the Center for Healing and Justice?
Yep. We Coach was a small consulting company that we ran for the last 4 years, and then by nature of being a consulting company, we felt like we weren't able to get our services to the people who needed it the most. We weren't able to take sort of philanthropic money that would allow us to work with the very grassroots programs. So we changed to a 501c3 nonprofit and the Center for Healing and Justice Through Sport, which is certainly more descriptive of the kind of work that we do.
And more relevant in today's society. I didn't know if you had a take in terms of kind of what's been going on with the John Gruden situation and just how that is probably more pervasive than John Gruden. So I didn't know kind of like how that is probably a pretty significant piece of your mission is to kind of, you know, equality and, you know, and just respect for diversity in sport.
I would say in our monthly meetings, we talk about an incident or an example like that every month, if not more than one.
Yes, it's certainly more pervasive than just John Gruden. And also no one was surprised. John Gruden, right? Like, wow, the least surprising revelation ever. But I think that, yes, these sort of social ills show up in sport, right? Without a doubt. And it is not an accident. It is by design that the young people who have the fewest resources to be able to, you know, sort of stay in sport are the young people who are most likely to be exposed to significant adversity, are the young people who need it the most and who are not serving in an equitable way. So I think sport needs to take a hard look at itself in the same way that our greater society needs to take a hard look at itself and sort of name what's going on and then be able to do a better job of being representative, right? Coaches are clearly male, pale, and stale, and they are not.
Thanks a lot, my friend.
that might be the title of this podcast episode. Is male, pale, and stale.
Coaches.
At least you didn't say old, because I'm glad old didn't rhyme with that.
Right. I can't take credit for it. U.S. Sailing, who's doing an outreach program to kids who don't typically get opportunities to do sailing, who we've started to do a little work with. They're the ones who said sailing is male, pale, and stale, and I said also is coaching. But you know, we need to be more representative. We need to be building systems that allow for kids to catch up, right? If the young people of color are the young people who are most likely to have had significant adversity, then the fact that we don't accommodate kids who've had significant adversity also means that we don't accommodate kids of color in sport in the same way that we should. And so all of these things are sort of tied up in each other in ways that that sport doesn't do a good job of addressing. And sometimes to me, that's even more frustrating because I think the potential sport has to do it is so powerful, right? It's such a missed opportunity that we don't do it as well as we could. And so that absolutely is part of, we see those two things, you know, a healing centered sport environment really can't exist in a oppressive system.
At the risk of being, I find that, you know, things tied to money or, you know, like it would take a lot of courage for an organization, a league to really self-reflect at the expense of financial.
It's not in their interest.
Right.
Correct.
So that is the particular hurdle. You know, obviously we have more ability to avoid those problems early on, but as they get older, the cost in people's mind is, if I don't win, if I don't get this, then these things go away and then we're in trouble. So I'm gonna, you know, that self-interest kind of gets in the way.
I think it means that we can't, the existing programs that exist are not in a position to be self-reflective about this. It's that we have to build another system that either complements or, you know, we have two triangles in sport. One is about resources, and so only the most resourced kids can afford the best of the sport experience. And one of them is about talent. And so if you're not at the top of either of those triangles, at some point you get pushed off, right? At some point you get, and for lots of kids, we know that's way too early. For me, it was after my very, like, you know, mediocre Division III college experience. But for lots of kids, it's before that. And
yeah.
And there's nothing to do if you don't make your high school team. There's no options that aren't elite travel clubs, right? The town leagues don't exist in the same way. The opportunity to do it just to have the activity and camaraderie is looked down upon at those ages, right? Yeah. You wouldn't spend your time doing that. If you don't make the A team, you're told you're not worthy, and who wants to do something when they're told they're not worthy?
Right. Well, and you know, as a personal story, my daughter played volleyball for junior high. She made it as a sixth grader, so our junior high was 6th, 7th, and 8th. And so she made the team. She wasn't, you know, she was kind of like on the JV. They kind of equated like varsity and JV, whatever. But she finished the season and everything. And then she went to try out, and she's on the development team in her travel league that she's going to do, because we wanted to keep doing volleyball, so she stays up on things. And we had no problem. She recognizes kind of where she is athletically. But the thing that stood out to me was that the development team only practices once a week, whereas the more elite travel teams practice twice a week and are more in tournaments. I'm like, how is that development? Like, like, I mean, they were just like, it just didn't make any sense. So I'm like, okay, I mean, we're gonna, you know, I just want her to, you know. And so the other thing, and you keep bringing up travel, is now I don't remember it growing up as much. I mean, I played hockey and baseball, and we had like Little League and American Legion and all these different things, but there's travel all year round, and people are playing the same sport all year round. It's I mean, I don't even now they've created the system so much that if you don't have any money, you can't possibly keep up.
No, you can't keep up. And we know it's, you know, it's sort of like how we know in schools that kids should be moving so that they can be ready to learn, right? And that rules that say kids who are wiggling in class are getting demerits, right? Like, we know those things are biologically disrespectful. We know that specialization is not good for player development, right? Like all the science tells us that
well-rounded
early specialization is bad for injuries, bad for burnout, bad for kids, full stop. We do it anyway. It's Tiger Woods' fault if everybody wants to, you know, the video of Tiger Woods on Bob Hope when he was 2 swinging a golf club and then turned into Tiger Woods is why everybody thinks you need to get out there with your golf club when you're 2. But we know it doesn't work. We know it's bad, and people still think that's how you get the edge.
So let me ask you this: Is there a way in which, if you change the system, and I know that that's a long way away, but if you change the system to where the mission of youth sport was about healing, development, and growth, and even social emotional learning, to be in not just sport development, but physical development, emotional development, all that you could still create these elite athletes that are going to feed the business, and kind of how would that look, or what you could kind of comment on that to kind of steer that ship in that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no doubt that if sport is done right, that there's nothing wrong with skill development and people getting better at sport and being able to say at some point that these athletes are the ones that you want representing the nation or the state or whatever it is, whatever that structure is. Assuming that just because you weren't sort of plucked out of that your experience stays, right? That there's no, because you didn't make that travel team, you still have other options that are attractive and invested in, and, you know, sort of make you feel good about what you're doing. I don't think anybody would, and I think that what we'd find is that, you know, as the pyramid gets wider, then it goes up higher, right? You know, the number of people who stay in, there's no doubt that we're losing incredibly talented athletes because they have a history of adversity.
Yeah.
And blowout of sport, right? There's no doubt. And for a lot of professional athletes, I think one of them is willing, they're the one that got saved somehow, but they know guys who were more talented than they were and didn't make it. And, so I think there's absolutely a way to do that and keep being the gold medal winning US that we all want our sports system to be. It just requires additional investment, and potentially investment. It's prevention versus intervention, right? Like, take all the money from juvenile detention centers and put it into youth sports for kids who otherwise don't have the opportunity to play. You'd have a lot fewer kids who need juvenile detention services.
Right. And oftentimes when programs do get money, it doesn't necessarily go into the idea of coaching from a neurodevelopment. It's getting them soccer balls or football equipment. It's not kind of related to making sure that our coaches know how to coach from a neurodevelopmental perspective. So
because we don't know how to be humans from a neurodevelopmental perspective, right?
Right. No,
so we're not teaching anybody that. Well,
it's in
unless
our DNA.
You take NME or NMT or NM sport.
Well, and I think it kind of comes into where Dr. Perry talks about like the kind of the power of group, but also kind of the tribalism and negative aspect of group that becomes a slippery slope in sports. Whereas, and that is usually facilitated and influenced by the coach, right? Like we have the ability to empower for good or empower for bad in terms of how we handle that. And I think you're right. Like if we don't have the power of self-reflection, it's going to be hard for us to change and then, do that. So, I wanted to kind of end on a favorite show of mine. I don't know I think Steve, you said that you were a Ted Lasso. You were a Ted Lasso fanatic. I didn't know if you'd watched Ted Lasso, Megan. Are you a Ted Lasso fanatic? So I think Ted Lasso works for your Center for Healing and Justice in Sport and is NM Sport trained. So I wanted like it. I want to read several quotes that are in the show, and I want you to identify maybe what neurosequential model concept he might be using in this. All right. So this is in the first episode. Taking on a challenge is a lot like riding a horse, isn't it? If you're comfortable while you are doing it, you're probably doing it wrong. So what's that?
Dosing.
Dosing. Yes. Give it. You have to be stretched and pushed out of your comfort zone.
It's a lot about stress response, right? Understanding that we all deal with stress. It's a matter of how we do it. And stress is okay. That bouncing on the horse, that discomfort, it's okay.
It's okay, right? Yeah.
If it's contained in the right way.
Right. So this was in the last season on whether or not he believes in ghosts. I do, but more importantly, I think they need to believe in themselves. He's big on belief. So I don't know if there's a specific neurosequential model concept, but the power of, I think, hope and belief. And I think that's an important concept in sports and
neuroplasticity.
Yeah.
And the fact that, we always talk about getting to the smartest part of our brains. We want to get to the cortex. Sport really allows us better access to the cortex, and then you just have to take advantage of it. Yeah. And I think that was part of what he says. Belief cannot happen, though, without regulation.
Right.
You can't skip a step. That's what I think I get from our model. You can't skip a step.
Right. It's hard to believe in yourself when you're dysregulated.
Yeah, you can't go right to belief. That's just not possible.
And you can't believe your way out of being dysregulated, right? Like you can't say, I think that's one of the things where we sort of oversubscribe to our ability to like push through in sport, and like, you know, it's the people who want it the most. It's Michael Jordan playing
the flu game,
right? You know, like, and
have you heard Scottie Pippen's quote about that?
No.
He was like, it's not like a back injury, it was just the flu. Like, he just like, why are you making like a big deal about it?
Exactly. But I think it keeps us from recognizing the reality of, to Steve's point, you can't skip that step, and that you can't think your way out of your stress response.
Mm-hmm. So this one, I think, also relates to another concept that we're kind of leaning into. And this one says, I think one of the neatest things about being a coach is the connection you get to make with your players. That's a loss that hits me harder and is going to stay with me a lot longer than anything that happens while playing a game on a patch of grass. So I think, what do you guys?
Let me give you an example. Just got asked to be taken out to dinner by a girl I coached 40 years ago. Mm-hmm. With her husband, by the way.
Right.
At the end of the night, we walk out in the parking lot. She throws her arms around me. She's over 50 years old. That might tell our listeners how old I am. And she says, I love you, coach. I love you, coach. 40 years of never seeing each other, and that still exists. That is healing, that's justice, that's power that we're looking for in sport. And I think I agree with Ted Lasso 100%. It's about the relationships.
Yeah.
Nothing could have boosted my morale more than that, and make it worth it. That the investment into those kids at that time, which I think I try to do a few extra relational things, matter. And that's all that matters. Maybe that's all that matters.
And that's the whole of the NM model, right?
Yeah.
Relational health is more powerful than adversity.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, no. And so one of the things that I think is important about that is, you know, I think it's very true in that show, is that, you know, he was a football coach and came in to coach a soccer team. And the first thing he focused on was the relationship. He didn't focus on trying to learn the game. He focused on the relationship. Right. And I think about a video that Dr. Perry, I saw during my training that I watched, where he was speaking about, like, at 40 some years old, I can learn to read, but to really be connected and have attachment, I can't learn that old if I don't have it in the first, you know, like the connection, just, you know, it's that relate piece that, you know, they have to be regulated. They also have to feel safe with their coach, to be able to believe and be empowered. And so this one I wanted, it's on Rebecca, the owner, and Ted Lasso says, she's got some fences, but you just have to hop over them.
I think that's all about making biscuits. That's what I think.
Making biscuits. Well, I have a reward concept that I have too. It says, I come bearing sweets to numb the sting of defeat. You know, and he talks about ice cream being the best, and it's kind of like seeing Billy Joel live. It never disappoints.
You know, it's sort of a cool thing that I think we're recognizing in the classroom and in sports, and then Ted Lasso with his boss, is that you also have to take care of the people at the top. And sometimes we think we don't. And I think that's sometimes where we actually have to start. That relationship gave him freedom to do what he really wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And maybe that's overanalyzing and going too deep on it, but that's kind of how I see it, is he just naturally knew that. And it worked. Mm-hmm. And did she need it? You know, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I'm also going back to kind of what Megan was saying, is that, you know, those kids put up fences all the time.
Absolutely. And
we have to be able to hop over those fences. I mean, not necessarily in a, you know, push too hard kind of way, but we have to be willing to try to get over those fences. You know, I think that's our duty and responsibility as coaches to be able to do that.
And every kid has a different height fence, right? And then, you know, or a different number of fences.
That intimacy barrier and yeah, absolutely. So I have two more quotes. This one is, our goal is to go out like Willie Nelson on a high.
Well, that could mean a lot of things to a lot of people.
Yeah.
So how are you going to interpret that one?
One way, while Megan's thinking, one way, and this is really important as a coach, is the closure of any day or any event of competition is crucial. Mm-hmm. And how to close it in a positive way and leave open the development for the next day. I think that is super important, and not always easy. It's not hard to do. It's just often forgotten. And I think that's, that cool quote makes us more aware that closure matters. How that's finishing on a high. Maybe a little different than a Willie Nelson high, but it is
not definitely alluding to that type of high, but yeah, going out on a positive. I think of that hard coaching quote that I read earlier. It's that where the language of constantly holding you accountable, constantly being on your back about what you're doing wrong and stuff like that leaves kids demoralized and hopeless about their ability to develop. And so you might think it's coming from a place of love, but the impact is not where we want kids to kind of be leaving practice. And I don't even know, like I teach at a college, and I have a lot of athletes in my class each semester, and this one kid's on this sport team, and I won't name the sport because I don't want it to kind of get back to anybody, but like the kid was like, when we do the daily check-in on our class, he's just like talking about how he's excited for the season to be over and to just be done with it.
Yeah.
And so he's not, and I don't know the source of it, we didn't get into it, but I have ideas about it. But if athletes are walking away from practice or walking away from the season going, I am so glad it's over, I hated it, or then we're totally missing the boat. Right. And I can't imagine that if people have that mentality that they're winning either, that they're making the progress and development that they are. So the last one is probably my favorites. It's when he's playing darts, and he says, guys have underestimated me my entire life, and for years I never understood why. It used to really bother me, but then one day I was driving my little boy to school and I saw the quote by Walt Whitman, and it was painted on the wall there. It said, "Be curious, not judgmental." I like that.
Oh, I like that a lot.
That's my favorite quote too. And I think is the core of what we're missing as coaches. Not just about be curious, not judgmental about young people, right? We started with Steve's story about the young boy who would have probably been kicked off that team without Steve.
Yeah.
But also curious and not judgmental about ourselves, right? This whole dysregulated adult can't regulate a dysregulated child, right? And instead of demanding that all the young people we interact with sort of meet our standards or else, be curious about why it didn't work and not, pass the blame on the young people who didn't hear it, didn't interpret it the way that you meant it, and be willing to say, I was wrong and let me try again.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am definitely feeling empowered and inspired by what you guys brought to this episode. If more people that are listening are empowered and inspired by this idea of healing in sports, where would you direct them first, or what would be some of the resources for people to check out to kind of learn about this concept of, we know the neurosequential model has the neurosequential model of sport, but I wanted you to kind of direct people to other pieces as well.
Definitely.
Don't forget one of your original groups you were a part of that's all about soccer and poetry, because mention them, because that's just the coolest concept ever. But
okay,
Megan has to answer.
I can allow for time for soccer and poetry. So
so there are a lot of great organizations that are intentionally working with kids who don't otherwise have these opportunities, right? There's sort of it mostly lives in the out of school time world, but it's the sort of bones of another system that should and could be expanded to complement the existing sort of youth sports system. And I was part of an organization for a long time called America Scores, which is soccer, creative writing and poetry, and service learning I think they're in 13 cities right now. And there are programs like that. There's Harlem Lacrosse that's in 6 cities. There's Soccer Without Borders. There's, local running programs in lots of cities that are trying to use sport intentionally as a tool for healing or positive development for young people, right? Just knowing the benefit that young people can get from it. So there's a whole sort of sports-based youth development world out there full of those organizations. And so that's a great place to look and see sort of what alternative organizations exist in your city.
Mm-hmm. Megan, on the Center for Healing and Justice website, do you have links to any of those? I don't know. I'm just asking.
No, not explicitly. There are actually quite a lot at this point. There are a number of city-based collaboratives too that are sort of representing there's the King County Play Equity Coalition in Seattle. There's the Philadelphia Youth Sports Collaborative. There's the Milwaukee Youth Sports Association, places like that are really trying to advocate for the programs that are doing it right. So I think those are great places to start. Bruce has a ton of videos. There are a ton of videos out there just on the basics of the NM concepts that can and should be translated for anybody working with young people in any capacity. So I always say, go to the source.
Well, and he has an episode, one of those COVID things on the healing power of sport, where he actually talks about that.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
Megan's organization,
that guy's pretty smart.
Yeah, and she won't do this, so I will. Her organization is filled with some of the best people I've ever met. So I think I would start at the Center for Healing and Justice Through Sport.
We got a great team. That is not, I will plug them. They are incredible. And all over the country. So
how just kind of because of I think the importance of your group, what are the things, like what are kind of the activities and tasks that you focus most on in the work that you're doing with this center?
Coach development and coach support. So trainings for organizations, trainings for directly for coaches, for the leadership of organizations, for resources for coaches and organizations. Coach training is not actually the norm. There's not, most people who go out there and coach don't get trained. I certainly didn't. I was a qualified college coach because I had played college soccer, right? That's, nobody ever taught me how to coach. Mm-hmm. And so some of it is changing that idea and encouraging organizations to invest in some very basic development of their coaches. The idea of people being willing to go all the way to NM sport is I think a bigger leap in coaching than it is in education or therapeutics, where people are doing this for their careers. Amongst career coaches, I think there's more, college and some high school people for whom it's their full-time job, but generally because it's not.
Because it's more volunteer and, very, very part-time. Yeah.
Yeah. We have to start with much smaller doses. And so we do that as what I hope is an on-ramp to people eventually being able to take NM sport.
I do think, though, that if you're going to coach a travel team, I think that it's worth making that leap. I think if you're doing rec, I think, looking at the videos from Dr. Perry or, looking at website resources and stuff like that are certainly helpful. But I think if you are a part of a really kind of long-term commitment in terms of sports, I think that's where it's really important.
But also, I think our expectation should absolutely be that coaches can sit through 2 hours of training, even if they're volunteers, right?
True.
That's actually targeted to them and can actually give them tools that will help them be more successful.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. Well, thank you very much, both of you. I really appreciate the time that you took, and I could have gone on for a lot longer, but I want to be respectful of your time. So I'm hoping that maybe if possible to probably revisit some of this in the future. So I appreciate your time.